And I'm sure lots of people, particularly parents, of course, will understand this statement. As a mother, you instinctively know when something feels not quite right, even if you cannot put your finger on it. And Susan had that feeling and had to push very hard to finally get the support she needed for her son and the diagnosis for her son. So Susan, a very good morning. Welcome to Chat City.
Good morning.
If I could just get you to come close to the microphone for me, that would be nice. Yes, about that. And then everybody can hear you nice and clear. So Susan, tell us a little then about the story. I mean, as I said there, you know, you're a mum and you know that there was something just not quite right with your son.
Yes.
What was it? I mean, what were the signs that were making you worry that something wasn't quite right?
I think as a mum with having other children as well, first of all, my youngest one, he struggled to sleep. And he really struggled to sleep, and that went on for about 3 years. I did speak to professions about it, and they said he would grow out of this not sleeping. He was very hyperactive. He struggled to concentrate, even playing with toys and that. He would only play with them for a few minutes, and he would have serious tantrums to the point of sometimes collapsing with the exhaustion, with the tantrums and that. And he was behind with his speech. So then, as my instinct was, I knew there was something different with him. He would struggle actually being with other peer friends. He would struggle with other children and that. And he didn't really interact with other children, so I knew, I had this sense that there was something not right. So within nursery, he really struggled because when structures had to be put into place, when they have to sit there in structures, he struggled with that. He couldn't sit there longer than a few minutes, and he would go underneath the tables. Anyway, in nursery, they struggled with him, and I had really major concerns thinking that, eventually he's going to be going into mainstream school, and I knew that, there's going to be major problems in mainstream school. Anyway, I felt like nobody was listening to me. The professions, the system was letting me down. And once he started going in mainstream school, he would be in there for 2 to 3 days. Then he would be taken out of school because they couldn't cope, because he wasn't sitting down. He was really struggling with the social aspects of what school's rules were and what is expected of a child from such a young age.
Right.
As a mum, I become quite anxious about what was happening. Explored it with the professionals and that. And it still felt like there was nobody listening. And then I'd felt, what happened is eventually he ended up getting a label. And this label brought on isolation. It brought on, it increased his anxiety and that. And he was just struggling to cope with the demands of the structures of formula curriculum.
And what age was he at this point? What age are we talking now?
It actually started from primary school, so it started from the age of 5, and the journey carried on for about 4 to 5 years. And within that 4 to 5 years, he would be in mainstream school. Within a 5 day, he would only probably be in 2 to 3 days.
So if we go way back to the beginning, I mean, are we talking, how old was he when you started on the journey of concerns, when you were saying, wait a minute, there's something not right here? How old was he at that point?
I would say from about 12 months onwards. And 12 months onwards, because this pattern was still consistent with it, the behaviours. It was consistent with the screaming and not sleeping at night.
So how we do read, don't we, and we hear stories of mums in particular who maybe seek medical attention, or they want to talk to professionals, and they sometimes feel that the professionals treat them as an overprotective mum.
Yeah.
Was that the kind of feeling that you were having at that time?
I think, like you said, the system does. One of the things that I had to go through was we had grommets fitted, thinking that was a concern to do with the lack of speech. I eventually was seen as a mum with 2 other children that were conforming within the system. So that was another thing that they looked at, you as a family, you know. We did all what the system asked of us, going on parenting courses just to show that we ticked them boxes within parenting courses. Took them to speech and language, but that still didn't change what was actually happening, and I felt like the system was letting me down, to the point of at the age of 7 that he's started deteriorating, and the isolation and what was happening with this label, it was affecting relationships within the system and that, and it was causing negative impact on him. His self-esteem got really low, that he, you know, towards the end that he started, his behaviour was starting to deteriorate, where, you know, as his parents, we were trying to understand what was going on. The school weren't listening, like I say, within the system, and then he tried to self-harm at the age of 7, and I thought, I've got to do something about this. If I don't do something about this, you know, it will just increasingly get worse and that. So I ended up fighting the system, and what I did is I pulled him out the system and said, what, you know, they weren't meeting his needs, and within that time of pulling him out the system, then people started listening to me.
So that when you say pulled him out the system, you actually took him out of school at that point.
Yes.
So at this point, he's about 7 years of age.
Yeah.
And when you say a label, at that point up to 7, had somebody put a label on him? I mean, what was that label?
I think the label, from people that don't understand, it was more about disruptive label. And I think what happens is when a child gets a label, other relationships affect.
So at that point, it wasn't a medical diagnosis.
No.
It was that people were seeing behaviours and making a label up based on the behaviours they were seeing.
Yes. Yes.
So at that point, because of the way people were dealing with him, they, I would imagine, in many respects were making the situation worse, and the behaviour increased because of the way he was being dealt with.
Yes, and what it was, he was receiving lots of negative messages. So every time he was going into the system, he would be put into isolation before anything had an impact. Or if there was situations, because he had this label, it would be him that would be, you know, the light would be on him because of the label and that. So it impacted him on other people making this label, you know.
So what we're saying is that your son at 7 was being dealt with as being labelled a difficult child, a badly behaved child, etc., etc.
Yes.
When in fact a medical diagnosis would have helped to treat him rather than probably punish him in the way people were dealing with him.
Yeah. And I think for me as a mum, I had to take a stand because, you know, as adults, if we were going into a working environment and people were being negative, we would be off with depression. And as a child, you have to put them into the system and, you know, the experience of what's going on. So his self-image was, my self-worth is less, you know, because of all these negative messages that he was receiving.
So at the age of 7, in a way, we can say he was being let down by the medical profession and the educational system.
Yes, yes.
Did at no point, I mean, we'll talk about medically also, but did the school, the nursery, not call in an educational psychologist at any point?
They brought in LEIS, which is a Lancashire Education and Inclusion Services, to do some work to help the school with putting things into place. But as she, you know, as she'd voiced, is that, you know, at the end of the day, she could put things into place, but she was only in there one day a week. So, you know, once she wasn't there, the things went back to how they were. And, you know, the difficulty is, and my heart goes out, my difficulty is with teachers, they have to put things into place, and they've got 30-odd children in the
to
classroom.
Look after, yes, quite.
So, you know, it is a difficult situation for teachers, but some children can't, you know, be the same as everybody else. His needs was totally different, and that was the difficulty. You know, his needs was totally different to everybody else's needs, but the expectations of others and perceptions of others is that he has to do as everybody else does, and he struggled with that.
So up until school age, in a way, you'd been seeking advice through a medical route.
Yes.
Then he went into the education system, and at that point, did the appointments medically stop, or had you just, you'd been told he'll grow out of it? Were you at that point thinking, well, if he goes into school, he may grow out of it? So at that point, you weren't challenging medical people about doing a diagnosis.
I did challenge from a very young age, and like I said, the first thing that they did was put grommets in, thinking it was because of that his speech was delayed. So that was the first thing that professionals came with us and put grommets in. When he went to mainstream school, I would see my GP on a regular basis. From that, I was referred to CAMS, which was a long process, which is the mental health team. The lady that took the case on, she ended up off with illness, so then I was discharged before even getting into the system. And from that discharge, I had to go back to my GP to get referred back in to find out why I was discharged. So the system let me down quite badly. And eventually, like you said, because of the isolation, because of the negative messages, his self-esteem was that low that he was struggling to go out of the house. He wouldn't play with other children. And me as a mum, other parents, like you say, actually seeing that, they don't understand of emotional well-being needs of an individual, and I started getting a label myself to a certain extent. There's that mum with that boy, he needs a good smacking, and it was like everybody else doesn't understand what's going on and the struggles that so as well as trying to get the professional help, the system letting me down, I was being judged as well. So it was a very difficult situation, and I just felt like no one was listening to me.
And that must have been terrible to feel like that, you living 24/7, your son, you knowing that there was something more than what you were being told by professionals, particularly maybe at that point within the educational system. So how did things then change when you took him out of school?
Well, I had to make a stand because, like you say, he was deteriorating rapidly and he was isolating himself, where he was getting to the point where he'd just seen messages of adults giving negative signs and negative messages to him. And I thought, I've got to make a stand here because his needs weren't being met. The expectations and perceptions with others, he was struggling with all that. So I think I decided as a mum, I tried to put everything into place. No one was listening to me. He was deteriorating, and as a mum, I needed to protect my son. So I took him out of the school. The GP backed me up and gave him a medical off with stress and that. So that helped me with the system because, they wanted to know why he wasn't going back into mainstream school. And then I had an emergency meeting with SEN and that. And we all sat down together and we decided that this is not, helping him. Emotional well-being, it's not supporting his needs. And we had to look at other areas what to do next. And I think from that time, we had a meeting with CAMS, and they didn't actually meet him because he was so vulnerable at that time that we couldn't get him out the house and that. And they actually diagnosed him as autistic, Aspergers autistic.
And that at this point he was now what age?
He was late sevens, 8-year-old, but like you say, I'd been trying to get this into place from the age of 5, which I knew, but I knew from 18 months prior that there was something different. But the traits were that strong that they diagnosed him without actually seeing him because of all the.
So once the name was given, Aspergers, I mean, was that for you like a jigsaw puzzle coming together? Did you kind of did you know about Asperger's previously, and when they mentioned that to you, did it seem like this jigsaw puzzle coming together?
I think that it felt like that answered me questions really, because the black and whiteness, the hyperactive, and yeah, it did answer me questions. It gave me an answer really to a certain extent, and I knew that he was different and he couldn't conform to the expectations of what was expected with him in the system and that.
And what about, how then did it help? How did things change once that diagnosis was made?
I think for myself, the change was me actually taking him out that system. I took him out that system, and then I needed to find somewhere else for somebody else to see if they could help him with these emotional needs and that. We looked at different avenues. He went into a referral school, but that didn't really suit his needs. Head teacher spoke to me and said he's probably best not in this place. I looked at specialist schools, and some of the specialist schools to me felt like they were enclosed specialist schools, and I don't know, because that behaviour, and like you said, the behaviour wasn't there all the time. He was very much like a mirror. If you actually give him messages that were positive, he would bring them back. And sometimes, like I say, with Aspergers, for society to understand, we put them in these boxes, no eye contact. He did have eye contact, he does have empathy, and I think, sometimes for society to understand, we put them in these boxes, and he didn't fit in the box, and that was why it was so difficult to get the diagnostics. So I did a lot of research into lots of different schools, and I found a specialist school that was really open and very supportive. He was very bright, highly intelligent, his memory was fantastic, so I knew he would thrive on that side of it. So eventually he went into a specialist school, and he went in there for about 2 years in a specialist school, and they had to do a lot of work on his self-esteem. A lot of work about, because like you say, he'd struggled with his English because of his black and whiteness, he'd rather have to touch it or see it before he could write a story about it. So they did a lot of work on his emotional needs, and, I take my hat off to them. They did a lot of work with him. His self-esteem started growing again. He started settling down quite a bit. His emotional needs were getting less. And anyway, we used football as social skills for him, so he knew how to interact with others, and he still does the football now. Anyway, the success story now is that he's back in mainstream school, high in achieving in A-levels now. Wow. And I think, you've got to put all that into place, fight the system to get them needs met.
So when you look back, how do you feel about it now emotionally, about those 7 years up until you took him out of school?
I think there's lack of understanding of emotional well-being of children, and I think it's so easy within society that we put labels on people, and we do as adults, and that's perception of people do put labels on people that are different. If you had a broken arm, they wouldn't expect you to do certain things, but because it's hidden in emotional well-being, I think society does struggle with that. So from my journey, I knew that I wanted to make a difference, and speaking to other parents that were struggling with similar experiences and that, and feeling isolated, feeling, not being listened to, I decided to start training. And I started my training 7 years ago, knowing, that nobody was listening to me. And I've trained to be a counsellor now, and I work with children within schools who have this label, which I take the label away, and build relationships with children with emotional well-being, and try and support the children, trying to empower them, and actually listen to the children.
And now doing all that kind of work, and looking at your own experience, how do you feel about the professionals that you were dealing with those years ago? Did they look at you as mum? Do you think they did look at you as being overprotective and too emotional when it came to talking about your son?
I think what they do, first of all, and then I do understand why they do this, they look at it as the whole picture as the family, and I do understand why they do that. And I think, because I had 2 other children that were conforming within society, that wasn't a parenting concern. I think I ticked the box by doing the parenting course. We had grommets fitted, so I'd fitted the system by doing the grommets, but still things weren't, he still couldn't conform within that society of what was expected of him. And I think, ticking all the boxes what was expected of me from the system, then I think they were eventually, because I was shouting loud enough that, some things needs to be done. Like you said, the system let me down earlier on. And I think as a parent, you've got to really fight the system to be heard.
And that's what I was just going to ask for anybody listening to this programme right now who has concerns about their child and feel they're not being listened to. What advice would you be giving to them?
I think you've got to be very strong and get support of other people, because I did get support of other parents and that were in similar situations. I think you've got to go to your GP, and I think you need to go to the Senko within the school, and if you still feel like it's not being heard, you've got to go back to your GP and Senko, and you've got to keep fighting the system. Eventually you will be heard, but you've got to be strong in the process.
And in particular now with your son, we are talking about Aspergers, which is a form of autism, and there are local support groups around, out there around the Preston area. There's one, I think, is it Leyland, Chorley, so there are support groups around that people can make contact with if they want to find out more.
Yes, there is, and like I say, I'm with another lady that supports children with ADHD and autistic Aspergers and that, and young children go to Cheeky Monkeys and within the Chorley area, and it's on Facebook, Twitter, ADHD and stuff like that. So there is a lot of support groups out there. But like you say, my experience now as a profession going in, people listen to me as a professional now, and I think my pathway now is supporting children with difficulties and trying to bring some training with some professionals within schools about emotional well-being and trying to meet that child's needs.
Well, and again, for anybody listening, if you do want to find out more, you can also go to the National Autistic Society online, and you can read more there about what is Asperger's syndrome and other questions that maybe you would like to ask. Susan, can I thank you very much for coming in this morning?
Thank you.
And after the story you've just told. It's so nice to know that your son is doing so well these days. What about the future? What is the future outlook?
I think that's another thing that I've not actually come down that pathway, but it will be some struggles in the future because of that. Like you say, it will never change. The black and whiteness will always be there. And children that are different sometimes struggle within society and that, and I think from the age of 18 onwards they're classed as an adult. Then you've got GPs and some of them aren't specialists in that area, so the journeys will continue. But I think for me as a mum is that we've used emotionally he's very stable now, so has been very supportive within that. But I think he would thrive within a business, and because, like you say, he's achieving high standards now because he's such a perfectionist that, getting him in the right industry, and I think that's what we've got to look at, his emotional well-being all the time within education. And he's a very good judge of character because, like you say, he's a very mirror image. Whatever you give, he brings back. If you're negative, he brings negative back. If you're positive, he brings positive back. So he's a very good judge of character, and I think he would do well and thrive in a certain industry.
Okay. Well, Susan, thank you for coming in this morning.
Thank you.